So facings, we have our back neck facing and we have our front neck facing. We just look at the front at the moment. This is we're looking at the inside. We just see that that matches to that. But when we stitch this on, we sew it onto the right side and turn it. So you can just see how it should be. It should fit exactly just there like that. So we're going to sew these two pieces together. Again, double-sided fabric, doesn't matter which side is which. We don't have to worry about pattern matching because this is a scrub where we have, although there are stripes, it's not essential that things on the inside match. At this point here, you'll see that there's an allowance for that to be, they're not quite level on that very edge. This is because you're going to have a 1 centimetre allowance across that top, which will come to about here. Okay, let's have a go. First of all, we will try once again to remember to use our correct stitch. So we don't have to unpick it because we've zigzagged it by mistake. Let's have a look at that one. Yeah, that'll do. I like to use the different parts of the foot here. There's the outside edge, there's a little line here or that line there to mark where I'm sewing, because sometimes seeing which line is which on there can be a little bit tricky. Let's do the other one. Here we have our facing, beautifully sewn together. I'm going to zigzag this one because at this point we can zigzag two together. It's much quicker than doing the one at a time. And once again, if you have an overlocker, that whole process of the lock stitch, which is the straight one, and the overlock or zigzag stitch happens at the same time. Zigzag this seam as well. Now here you'll see what we have here is a nice ring shape that we're going to put into our uniform. Before we do that, I'm going to go all the way round the outside edge with a small zigzag to make sure it doesn't fray. And I'm going to go all the way round, but the seam here on the facing will turn the V to the outside, to the back, like this, so that when I do my zigzags all the way around the edge to prevent the fray, the seam lies flat towards the back and not towards the front. So I'll start zigzagging and you can come back when I've finished.
Okay.
And there you'll see we have our ring shape, perfect for putting onto the scrub top. Cut off any little stray threads. If you have plenty of time, one thing you can do, and if you're happy to do this, is to then turn this in and stitch it down all the way round. This gives a very nice, neat finish. So if you have got time to do that, I suggest you do. But it's not essential, okay? It just gives a nicer finish so that when you look at it, you've got a nice clean edge. Depends how much time you've got. Right, so to put our facing in, first of all, take our tunic top, turn it right sides out and admire your handiwork so far. Look, we're half made. We've got our shoulders here and we've got our neckline. So we take our facing, which we have got with the wrong side up towards us, and we try and see if we can get the V on perfectly fitted to the outfit. So right sides together, and we know which is the right side because it's the side that hasn't got the projecting seam on it, and we put some pins in. This you do need to pin because we're going to try really hard to get it nice and smooth and cleanly into position. Spin it round without dropping our pins. Remember, you don't want to be pinning through the back layer, you're only pinning through the top layer of the fabric, so you can run your hand underneath like that. Try and do this on a flat surface. You won't get wrinkles in it then. Now this is a 3D shape, so there should be a little bit of adjustment on the curves. Here we've got up to the neckline and our seam is just about where it should be, which is bang on in line with the shoulder seam there. So our facing is meeting quite nicely at the shoulder. And we're putting this facing onto the curve. Let's see how we can do around this side. Same thing this side. Remember, we're going to try and lie the seam flat towards the back. Here we zigzagged it flat towards the back, and this seam go to the same this side. As you try to pin the facing on, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get it to lie completely flat, and making sure that, because your seams sometimes can be not quite in quite the right position here. It doesn't matter as far as the finished garment is concerned. So just make sure you get your facing as accurately onto the fabric as you can, so that when we stitch it together, we're able to have a seam all the way around. You'll see here, in order to get it to lie on, this particular facing is a little bit higher up. That's simply because it's not quite long enough to fit the curve when I cut it out, but it isn't a crucial issue. What matters is that we get it attached all the way round. We just look to make sure we've got it pinned so that it's covered all the way round and lies as flat as possible. So it should look something like that. We're now going to sew the facing onto our garment. We're going to go back to our straight stitch with a 2.8, and because I'm sewing something which is a little bit inside the top, I'm going to just take this bit off to make it a bit easier. Right, we put the edge, which is the two edges together, the two sides together of the facing with the top, against our 1 centimetre mark, and we stitch round as carefully as we can. This is the one time when speed, just go relatively slowly so that you don't have an accident and stitch fabric in loops underneath. You'll see that this corner, when we get to it, is a little bit awkward. Stitch up to your line, turn the fabric. If you can lift your foot and swivel the fabric very slightly, you're able to get onto that the back shoulder seam. Now, when I just lift this up to show you, remember this here, the underneath piece of fabric is a little bit behind the curve. So we're going to give a little bit more of a seam allowance here, just to make sure we don't accidentally miss a piece of the fabric. But that sometimes happens when you're trying to jiggle facings into place. And we try and get a nice straight line across the back, because this is going to be the back edge of our top. And we come towards the seam again. We make sure we're stitching this seam flat down. And we get to the seam, we lift. And this time we're going to, remember we've got that little bit of a lip here. So we're going to start lining this up, ready to get back as soon as possible onto our 1 centimetre seam allowance, which, because I can feel it here, is about here. Personally, I don't worry too much about the accuracy of facings when we're making scrubs. If we were making a ball gown, every millimetre would count. Here we are trying to create something which is going to be of use as quickly as possible. So we want good quality, sturdy material, sturdy sewing, but we're not quite as concerned about the finer details as we might be if we were making something, for example, on the sewing bee. Now we're coming down the front edge, and you can see we're heading fast for the V. I want you to look and see what we're aiming at is just straight down from that point. So we're going to keep going past it, past the point, down to that bit there. We are now level with the vertical of the V. So we spin round. We do 1 stitch across if we can, because that gives us a little bit of room, and then we're going to stitch back up the other side. I'm lining the edge of my foot, and I can see where I'm aiming at because we've gone all the way around. Overlap a bit, press the scissors, and we've sewn in the facing. Here we have our facing stitched in beautifully. And the next thing we need to do is clip to make sure we can turn it. So we put our hand inside to make sure there's no risk of us clipping the fabric underneath, and we snip into the area that we have been sewing down here where there's this point. We go right low down, tiny scissors, not through the stitching, but just up to it. At the top, same thing, we come round here, we go round the curve to the stitching. If you don't clip your curves, you will never get the fabric to lie flat. And then, let's see what happens when we turn it. When we turn this to the inside, hopefully we will have a nice, clean, straight edge, like that. We're going to press that down with our fingers, and we're going to pin it in place. So the facing is now on the inside, and we have a nice clean edge on the outside. And we're going to go all the way around and do that. Let me show you the V before I go around the other parts. We're turning it using the fact that we've clipped that onto the inside. Because we put 1 little stitch across the bottom, we've actually got a little tiny bit of a horizontal there, which makes it easier to get it to lie flat, and we pin that there. We also go all the way round and pin up the sides, ready to do some top stitching. I've now pinned the facing down, so it is pinned down all the way around the outside, and I'm now going to top stitch to hold the facing in place. To do top stitching, you sew quite close to the edge, but not right on it. And we change the size of the stitch, if we can, to a larger stitch, because this is almost, it's a bit ornamental really, if we get it right. And it's important to try and get it as accurately as possible, even to the edge of the garment. So let's see how we go. Gone all the way around. We've met up, and we've just continued on it just a little to cover that join, which is incidentally on the back of the neck, not on the front. Makes it just because it's less visible. Cut off any threads we've got. And then we can take out our pins and see how it looks.